going. Good evening. Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for November 5th, 2018. Can we get the roll, please?
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
John Spring.
Here.
Greg Strike.
Here.
Danielle Bailey.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Brian Looney.
Here.
Seth Anderson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have two sets of minutes for October 1, 2018 and October 8, 2018. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Seconded by Mr. Strike. Any issues on those, either the minutes of October 1 or October 8? Okay, hearing none, those minutes are approved. Next up is disclosures. Mr. Gardner?
None.
John?
I see you have a resolution on the agenda. I wasn't there for that particular meeting, so I won't be voting on it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Looney?
Yes, I'd like to disclose that in the case of the 3rd Avenue Channelization Project, which is case 2018-028, that my firm has not started work on that project, but we will be helping the city with the lighting design when it gets in the design process.
So this is related to case 2018-95, is that right? The design study review for 3rd Avenue Channelization. You said, Mr. Looney, your firm is under contract to do what specifically for that?
We're under contract. We have a term contract with the city to do electrical engineering tasks, and so they've asked us to help them with the detailed lighting design on that project when they get to that phase. They're not there yet, but it would be they would replace the existing lighting with a new lighting system.
So your point is, as this, if this project were to move forward, at that point, your firm would be under contract to further that design work.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to need a motion to direct Mr. Looney to participate. Thank you, Mr. Strike. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Strike, would you like to speak to your motion?
Do you want to go on me?
Sure, you can.
Well, I could go through the conflict of interest piece, but I think that, this is a general resolution for the proposed capital improvement budget, and it's one of many projects that are identified within.
We're not talking the resolution. I don't think we're talking the resolution. We're actually talking the case. Maybe Mr. Looney misspoke.
I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually stated the wrong case number, so I'm sorry. I guess I did say it was 2018-028, but it's not. It's the, where to help me out here?
0095.
0095, that's
Then
right.
I withdraw my motion.
Which is case 5A. That's right.
Okay, so I'm still going to need a motion to direct Mr. Looney to participate. Thank you, Mr. Spring. Second. Mr. Spring, can you speak to this?
Yeah, I have a question for the commissioner. It appears that this design study report does not include lighting details. It seems
That's
to me.
true.
And is there any possibility that that any action that we might take on this might enhance your firm's advantage or give you an edge in the bidding on other parts of the project?
Well, I guess it would, if this were to not pass and the project were to just disappear, it'd be one less task for us to do. So I guess you could look at it that way. It does impact us that direction.
Yeah, and just to be clear, maybe staff can weigh in on this, but I don't think if we don't approve a design study report, that does not kill the project per se, does it, Mr. Whitfield?
No, it does not.
The municipality could bring it forward, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Chair. And it seems to me that since we're not really reviewing anything that's under the purview of his firm, that I won't be supporting the motion. Will you be voting to direct Mr. Looney to participate? Oh, yes, the motion is to direct him.
Yes.
I'm
so
sorry.
You're saying you will vote affirmatively on that motion?
Yes, right.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Please vote. and you are directed to participate.
Thank you.
Mr. Strike.
No disclosures.
Ms. Bailey.
None.
Andre. Nothing. Mr. Anderson.
None.
I have two disclosures. First is I was not present during case 2018-0090, resolution 2018-028, so I will not be voting on that resolution. Secondly, related to the Third Avenue project, the lot that is the Brother Francis Shelter is owned by the municipality. The building is actually owned by Cook Inlet Housing Authority, which is my employer. It's operated by Catholic Social Services, but the building is ours, and I'd like to disclose that as it relates to the Third Avenue channelization project. Mr. Looney, and I'll let Danielle carry this on.
I move to direct you to be involved with the case.
Do you want to speak to your motion?
Sure. It seems like the channelization it is a project, and I realize that the Catholic Social Services building is a significant adjacent development, but I think the project is a project without those buildings. Currently there's no pedestrian facilities on one side of the road, so there's plenty of things that need to be fixed up there with that project.
Does anyone else want to speak to the motion? Commissioner Strike?
Yes, if I understand too, having read through, this is a design project that we're currently approaching 35% design, after which there will be further design that will take place on the property itself proper that would impact. So I would be cautious to review whether or not it's appropriate to actually participate on this, because it does have a direct bearing on the owner of the property and the owner of the building. I think there's a direct relationship on this design for the funds that will be expended and the time and efforts and so forth on the property itself. So I think as an abundance of caution that I'm kind of inclined that the chairs should probably remove themselves from the project.
Perhaps we could get a weigh-in from staff. Could you kind of walk us through the timeline on this and how a vote on this later on would then proceed? Or it sounds like Commissioner Strike is saying it will then come back potentially.
So the vote tonight would only potentially impact the timeline of the project insofar as the draft design study report is completed and PM&E is able to move on to the plans in hand drawing. How long those take, I'm unaware of.
So Commissioner Spring?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't see that, what I've seen in this design study report, that a sidewalk's going to make much difference to the value of the Brother Francis Shelter facility. I mean, if I thought it was going to be like, major access to the Brother Francis or somehow enhance the property value, I would say vote no, but I'm going to vote in favor of the motion.
Well,
I think Commissioner Looney's in the queue next.
I'll probably expound a little bit on Commissioner Spring, and we'll hear the details a little later during the testimony, but essentially, my understanding of the project is it's a no-net gain in right-of-way. So it's being crafted to use the same footprint as the existing road, so there's no real direct impacts to the adjacent property owners. That's the point I'd like to make.
And the point I would make is there is direct impact to the property owners as referenced by the crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED principles, which would be implemented in order specifically to take away issues that are happening on the property. So there's a direct benefit to the property owners and so forth to remove those unwanted activities away from their property onto public areas utilizing design principles that would be incorporated into this design. So there is a direct one-on-one benefit incorporated into this process to the benefit of the property owner.
And just as a clarification, again, Mr. Robinson, can you explain to me again the property ownership versus building ownership, just so I have it clear in my head?
So the land is municipal land. The building that is the Brother Francis Shelter is owned by Cook Inlet Housing Authority. And so we basically take care of the physical plant. We do not handle the day-to-day operations. The operations of the shelter are done by Catholic Social Services.
And maybe you can explain this a little bit more for me. Since you own the building but not the land, you do outright own the building, though?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they maintain the property.
Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners before we vote? And Commissioner Robinson is directed not to participate.
Very good. Now, you could reorder that agenda for me, too. You'd really make my night. But, all right, next up is the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda? Motion by Mr. Strike, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Are there any commissioners have any issues with the resolution? Any objection to approving the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda and that resolution are approved. Next up is time extensions. Case 2018-98, Municipality of Anchorage, Eagle River Street Maintenance. This is a request for an extension for a previously approved conditional use to allow a portion of existing material storage site to be utilized for disposal of unusable materials from road maintenance projects. I think generally called the Loretta French fill site. So with that, could we have the, this is not a public hearing item. Could we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make this brief. This is a request for a 5-year time extension to a conditional use for a natural resource natural resource fill site. On January 11, 2016, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved Resolution 2015-050 for a conditional use for a fill site. The property is commonly referred to, as you mentioned, Loretta French fill site, and is owned by the Municipality of Anchorage. A portion of the site is used for disposing of unusable materials for road maintenance projects. The site has the capacity to accept 150,000 cubic yards of material. To date, only 34,800 cubic yards have been placed at the site. The annual monitoring reports have been provided in accordance with the resolution. No complaints have been received from the public, and the current conditions are substantially the same as those which existed when the conditional use was approved. Thus, the Planning Department recommends approval of the 5-year time extension to September 30th of 2023. The petitioner is here to answer any questions that the Commission may have about the operation or the case. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have of staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Any questions? Mr. Strike.
Yes. Through the chair. Have there been
Your mic.
Thank you, and through the chair. Have there been any complaints from the neighbors that have been logged in, dust control, any issues?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, none that have been received by the Planning Department. Perhaps Mr. Littlefield can speak to any issues that he's seen on site, but as far as I know, no complaints.
Okay, because I recall when this first came through, there was concern on traffic and dust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, this might be a question for the petitioner's representative. There's a condition of approval from the 2015-050 resolution, number 16, that said resolved with staff the typical standards followed for the inspection of materials that are brought into the site to ensure that they are the same as are followed by private industry. And so it said resolved, so I was just wondering what maybe if you could tell us what those procedures are and what they're designed to protect against.
Hi, I'm Mark Littlefield, the Deputy Officer, Eagle River Street Maintenance. To go over the procedures that we do, most of the material that we pull is from the city streets and the ditches and during construction projects that we can't reuse, and it's unusable material. It's inspected before it leaves the site. It's our crew working there, and it goes to the fill site, and then it's inspected by another operator there. And if it is deemed that it is at either one of the locations that is deemed that it is contaminated in any way, both the sites will pull the material from the fill site and we'll stop excavating where we're at and figure out where the contamination is coming from. So that's pretty much how we check any material coming to the site.
Good, Mr. Spring?
Yeah, over the past 2 years that the conditional use permit has been in place, have there actually been instances where materials have been rejected at either or both of those sites?
Neither of the sites. Neither.
And that surprises me. As a contractor and having developed some of their sites and using sites similar to this in the private industry, we reject sites all the time for material that came off C Street, Arctic, Dowling, and the new Seward Highway during its reconstruction. So that surprises me a little bit that you haven't had any.
Well, 99% of the material that we pull is right from the ditches. And it's basically, we're excavating unusable material, we're putting in a French drain or whatever, so it's pretty much clean material.
It surprises me, having worked on these other sites, that material that was taken off of those sites in the same drainage area contaminated. Thank you.
Mr. Gardner?
I'll direct this question to staff, but let me know if I should ask it of the petitioner. But I was just curious if the 5-year extension that's being requested is kind of standard for this, given that the original approval was for, I guess, slightly less than 3 years, and kind of if that...
Through the chair, Mr. Gardner, yeah, typically for a conditional use for a fill site, a typical extension would be a 5-year extension. So this is typical and in line with other approvals.
And is the initial approval for a shorter period typically also just to get a sense of how it's working, or is that often 5 years too, or how does that work?
Oftentimes that it's a direct result of the request. If the request is for 3 years, then we would recommend approval of that of a 3-year approval. But in this particular case, I think the amount of fill that was being brought in probably was not at a rate that they had anticipated, and thus need more time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Thank you, Mr. Littlefield. Staff, what's the will of the body? Need a motion to approve the time extension. Mr. Spinelli.
In the case of 2018-0098, I move to approve the 5-year time extension.
Thank you, and that's seconded by Ms. Bailey. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Mr. Spring, is that you?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. When we approve the time extension, does the conditions of approval go along with that?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, yes. Yes, we're approving the original conditional use. All the conditions apply.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? That'd be a good time for a finding or two, or a vote, and then I'd like to at least hear from somebody afterwards. Time extension is approved. Can I have a couple of findings? Mr. Looney.
Yes, in the case of 2018-0098, for the 5-year extension, I find that the operation of the site for the last almost 3 years has been relatively has not caused any complaints from the neighboring properties. So I think it's relatively easy to say that it's compatible with the adjacent users.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Looney. Mr. Strike.
Yes, and as an additional findings that the petitioner and the staff have allayed any concerns that the previous conditions that were posed have been met.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Spinelli.
I'll just add that the site was originally accepted with a capacity of 150,000 cubic yards, and they only have 34,000 cubic yards placed to date, so the 5-year extension seems appropriate. I'll also add that Eagle River soils are far less contaminated than Anchorage soils. generally speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Spinelli. At this point, I'm going to step away for case 2018-0095. Laura, you can come find me.
Ready? In the matter of case 2018-0095, can we get the staff report?
Thank you. This context-sensitive solutions project is intended to address pedestrian safety issues on 3rd Avenue between Ingram Street and Post Road with improved pedestrian accommodations and the elimination of one lane of vehicle traffic, as illustrated in the preferred alternative on page 7 of this report. Project management and engineering, PM&E, will also enhance lighting, improve drainage facilities, and incorporate crime prevention through environmental design, or CEPTED principles. CEPTED principles call for designing public spaces to be less hospitable to criminal activity, but how CEPTED is proposed to be implemented in this project will not be determined until the plans in hand stage, or approximately 55%, 65% design. Per AMC 2103-190B, the applicant is seeking the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval for this DSR, or Design Study Report, or DSR, which includes the project's 35% design drawings. The Planning and Zoning Commission may act to approve with conditions, or return the application to the project management team for additional work. Looking at the Design Study Report and existing conditions, 3rd Avenue between Post and Ingra is a 60-foot wide, approximately quarter-mile long section of road consisting of 3 one-way 12.5-foot vehicle lanes. This section of 3rd Ave is part of a one-way couplet and includes 4th Avenue and includes an 8 to 10-foot pedestrian path on the north side that is designated as multi-use trail per the 1997 Airwide Trails Plan, the 2014 Fairview Neighborhood Plan, and the Anchorage Bicycle Plan. There is significant pedestrian traffic in the study area, and the DSR asserts that a notable portion of the traffic are workers, volunteers, and clients at Beans Cafe and Brother Francis Shelter. This is also an important public transportation corridor, with one pull-out bus stop located at the northwest corner of 3rd Avenue and Post Road. The stop is served by Route 20, connecting downtown with Mountain View and the UMed District. Per comments received from the Department of Public Transportation, there was an average of 88 boardings at this stop on weekdays between October 23, 2017 and August 31, 2018. This is about 7 times higher than the system-wide average of 12 weekday boardings per stop during that same period. The DSR cites that the average annual daily traffic, or AADT, in 2014 for the study area was 8,600 vehicles, which is less than the intended Class 2A minor arterial design capacity of 10 to 20,000 vehicles. Alaska DOT and PF data also shows a range of 6,763 to 9,972 vehicles between 2012 and 2017, with 7,052 recorded during the most recent count in 2017. Truck traffic and commercial vehicle traffic uses the project corridor to access surrounding industrial and commercial uses, but volume data is not available. According to DSR, there were total of 14 crashes reported between 2014 and 2016, 9 of which involved pedestrians. No variances from the DCM have been requested this time, although the multi-use trail on the north side of 3rd Avenue may require design adjustments and/or design variants to waive some criteria, such as require 2-foot shoulders on either side to provide separation from vehicle traffic. The existing bike trail easement is not utilized in 35% design thus far, and the DSR states that the easement might not be used due to stakeholder concerns about illegal uses occurring in the separation area. The easement could be used to provide additional right-of-way for a trail facility that meets design criteria and manual requirements, so it is recommended that the project use the full bike easement in order to maximize design flexibility.
I think we have a request.
Could you repeat that last part again? You kind of flew through that.
Oh, excuse me. So to repeat, my apologies. No variances from the design criteria manual have been requested this time, although the multi-use trail on the north side of 3rd Avenue may require design adjustments and/or a design variance to waive some criteria, such as the required 2-foot shoulders on either side of the multi-use trail to provide separation from vehicle traffic. The existing bike trail easement is not utilized in the 35% design thus far, and the DSR states that the easement might not be used due to stakeholder concerns about illegal uses occurring in the separation area. The easement could be used to provide additional right-of-way for a trail facility that meets DCM requirements, so it is recommended that this project use the full bike easement in order to maximize design flexibility. Another recommendation concerns speed. Given that the vehicle volumes in the study area are lower than the typical design of a Class 2A arterial, the lack of vehicle traffic congestion issues, the presence of very high volumes of pedestrians and transit riders, and the importance of speed as a factor in pedestrian injuries and fatalities, it is recommended that the project consider a posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour and a design speed of 30 miles per hour. Comments from MOA Public Transportation and MOA Traffic have informed further recommendations. MOA Public Transportation requests that the existing bus stop and pullout at 3rd Avenue and Post remains. Because of the high number of boardings and the extra time some of the riders require at the stop to board the bus, the pullout will help to maintain the functional elements of the roadway and allow a safe place for buses to dwell while riders are boarding and alighting. In addition, MOA Traffic suggests reducing the curb radii in the southeast corners of 3rd and Latouche and 3rd and Carluke, since as a westbound one-way facility, no northbound right turns onto 3rd Avenue are possible from either street. The reduced curb radii should more closely resemble the tighter curb radius on the southeast corner of 3rd and Ingra. This would serve to shorten the pedestrian crossing distance and help prevent vehicles from making a wrong-way right turn onto 3rd Avenue. With that being said, the department recommends approval of the preferred alternative C in the draft design study report, 3rd Avenue channelization, subject to the conditions on page 13 of the staff report. Thank you.
Commissioner Strike?
Thank you, and to the chair, to the staff. To clarify, there is a current 6-foot bike easement that is not currently used in the design for the 35%. But that you expect it not to be used in the future design as it will be used for something else?
I would defer to project management and engineering to clarify that. It appears as if in the 35% design it's not being used, but it may or may not be used in the future iterations of the design, depending upon how the design for SEPTED shapes up.
So we'll come back to may or may not be used. So that was one question. The other question is, you mentioned the crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED principles that would be incorporated for the minimizing the inappropriate behavior on the property proper and be working in conjunction with the property owner and the municipality in using this design practice principles on public property. Although we're at the 35%, there are no examples of these types of design principles identified. Can you provide us any examples that might be incorporated into the final design, or at least into the 65% design? And it's a kind of a rhetorical question because it looks like we won't necessarily have any public input as to those principles that are identified. So the only chance we have right now is to hear what might be incorporated, but still not locked in.
Yes, I would defer to project management and engineering on the question of to what extent and how SEPTED principles might be integrated into the project. But that's correct, I do not know. I cannot provide you with any examples myself.
Okay, and so the concern I have sitting here at the commission is that we're looking at design principles, identified design principles that will be incorporated, but we're not going to tell you what they are because we haven't figured out what they are. We haven't gotten to the further design. This isn't a public process. There is no public hearing to vet certain of the design elements other than the input from a private owner of property, operator, and the municipality. So we've taken that now out of the public domain and out of the public hearing process. I'm trying to figure out what we're doing here tonight. I wonder if we're too soon.
Based on the information presented tonight, the commission may, again, approve with conditions, or return the DSR to the applicant, in this case PM&E, for further work. So those are the avenues that the commission has tonight.
Well, I would offer up that there is one additional avenue available to this commission. That is, a public hearing is not required, but may be held at the commission's discretion. So that, too, is an option for this commission.
Correct, yes, that is an option.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spring?
Yes, through the chair. I also have some concerns about whether the process has been completed to my satisfaction before it got to the Planning and Zoning Commission. A couple things I noticed, and I expect the petitioner will probably correct me if I'm wrong or elaborate on it. I didn't see any evidence that the Ped and Bicycle Committee of AMATS was consulted, and I don't know how that's written into the context-sensitive solutions document, but it seems like that's a committee that, well, I mean, that's their responsibility, is to look at road projects and determine whether or not it meets the plan as approved by the city, the bicycle and ped plan. Plus, I think they have good input into this project. And this, in reality, this project is a ped and pedestrian, a bicycle and pedestrian project, particularly with respect to the safety of pedestrians. And also I didn't see in the scoping any input or indication that the trails coordinator was involved in the scoping. I don't know if there is still a trails coordinator or if they're doing anything with that. If not, I think that's a problem. There's got to be some input from a trails coordinator, somebody who specializes or advocates for trails and pedestrian facilities. So I'm a little concerned. Maybe the petitioner will convince me, but I think there's another step that needs to be done, but maybe before we get this and can make a recommendation for approval. And that's a rhetorical question, I guess, to staff, unless you want to comment on it. Okay, thank you.
Seeing no request for comment, can we hear from the petitioner?
Hi, Madam Chair. My name is Glenda Radvansky. I am a design engineer with Project Management and Engineering, and Todd Jacobson with the Boutte Company is currently the project manager on this project. If you'd like, I could respond to a couple of the concerns that have been expressed by the board, if that would be appropriate at this time.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
So with respect to Mr. Strike, I can give you some examples of some SEPDED principles, but the reason that they haven't been incorporated so far is because we had to hire somebody because we don't know exactly how they work, and we want a professional at it to help us with the design. They're under contract. They'll be starting to work with us actually as soon as you guys give us the authorization to move forward. Some examples provided to us by APD include things like not incorporating benches. One of the requests that they had, and it leads back to the conversation with respect to the easement, is the way the current law is written, APD has enforcement capability on sidewalks, but if you have a separated sidewalk, they don't have the ability to enforce loitering or other types of issues in the separation between the sidewalk and the roadway. So their specific request to us was that we put the sidewalks back of curb, which is in deviation from the general concept of a multi-use trail. And the reason that I can't tell you whether or not we're going to use that easement is because I don't know. Once we have our SEPDED person on board, they're going to help us figure out what we can do. Some examples are, if you have open space, put raspberry bushes in it so that people can't lay down and take a nap in it, so that you don't have to worry about enforcing loitering because you've made the area, natural but inhospitable. Obviously, you can't put big raspberry bushes in between the sidewalk and the road because that eliminates the visibility, which is one of the key aspects of safety and the SEPDED principles. So at this point in time, I don't know the answer to the question, and I do have to say that part of the CSS process is that we have to go to UDC with our landscape design, and it's our landscaper that's actually our landscape architect. I don't want to offend anyone. Our landscape architect is the one who's going to be helping us with the SEPDED principles. He's our pro. And so there will be an opportunity for a governmental body similar to yours to review not only our process, but our design and incorporation of the SEPDED principles into the 65 and the 95, and then ultimately the final design. Does that answer your questions?
It does and it doesn't. It raises the additional questions as where's the public review? Where's the public process during this course? You give some examples of what can be done, but not what may be done, what's feasible necessarily for this without talking to the experts.
We will be continuing through the CSS process to involve the community councils. A bunch of the advisory commissions and boards we've already spoken with, the Trucking Association. We have information with respect to the requirements of the bicycle plan. As we move forward, as appropriate, we'll incorporate the Bike and Ped Committee. It's not technically a requirement anywhere, but if we get to the point where we believe that it's appropriate for the process that we're following, we will certainly incorporate them.
And that's part of the reason and the rationale for having a public process related to the public hearing, so that all of that can be vetted and identified and put out on the table rather than what's happened in many times in closed meetings and behind other community sessions and what they've approved, but we hear many times that the community councils come out with a resolution only to find out later, here's the resolution, but 90% of the folks at the meeting were all voting no. Yet 5 people on the board voted, here's what we decided to do. So again, my reluctance here is not seeing the full public process taking place on this particular one, because I think it does have a lot of interest within the community, and not just within the community councils, but also for the, like you mentioned, the truckers and the people that use this routing. And I've used this route before, and
it's an arterial. Lots of people have.
It is an arterial. It is a method. You use this route. And so therein lies one concern. There is an issue down there that we're trying to address. We all understand the problem, but we got to be careful that we don't move the problem from one area to another, which clearly is one of the intent on this, on the direction is, again, the individual property owners are trying to use the principles to minimize the inappropriate behavior on their property. Not on the city's property.
But you understand, sir, that the project that we're discussing today is exclusive to the right-of-way. We are not going to be doing any work on private property associated with this project. If they choose to move forward with the project on their own property, that's their project, their business. We're trying to coordinate with them if one exists so that we don't do something, we don't move their driveway to a place that won't work. But this project is specific exclusively to the right-of-way.
Except that our project will coordinate with their project to ensure that when completed, the two projects will function together.
And when I say that, sir, what I mean is I'm not going to move their driveway 20 feet so that when they want to redo their circulation, I haven't made that impossible because of their driveway location.
And I guess my point is we don't know what it means, because all we have is a 35% design to go off of, and quite frankly, you can't.
All that's required at this point, sir.
Before it comes to this body.
Correct.
And before it comes into. In my opinion, it seems like we're just a little bit ahead of the power curve here for this particular project. And my concern is that we have a lack of public process, and I would prefer to see this happen in a public hearing. And that's just coming from one commissioner. So I'll leave this to the others. Thank you.
Commissioner Spring.
Yeah, I feel like we need to ask you whether or not you agree with the department recommendations that are in the staff report on page 13, 4 of them.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask you if you agree with the department recommendations, 4 conditions of approval on page 13.
Oh, absolutely. And as previously stated, if we have the ability to use, I'm not going to tell you that we're not going to use that bike easement, because at this point in time, I'm not sure of the answer to that question. If we can figure out a way to use it so that we can get better separation, we can get a better facility, that is absolutely our plan to do so. With respect to the other recommendations, not a problem.
Okay. There's another comment, I think, in the staff report from, and I forget who, maybe staff can remind me, about reducing the speed limit along that section. I think you're going with 30 miles an hour, which is the standard for arterials. Somebody suggests...
That's actually the Title 21 required speed.
What's that? Oh, okay. Well, is down to 30? Down to 30, okay. Okay, so that was the comment that I read, was it to reduce it to 30, so it has been reduced to 30? Do you remember, staff, the comment on speed, reducing speeds on the
Yeah, so currently the project has a design speed of 35 miles per hour and a speed limit of 30 miles per hour, and that is in fact the minimum in the design criteria manual for the type of arterial that it's designated as. The recommendation to consider, and it's not a condition of approval, but to consider a lower speed limit, a lower design speed of 30 miles per hour, and a speed limit of 25 miles per hour, is related to the exceptionally low vehicle traffic volume and the high level of pedestrian conflicts and the impact of speed on pedestrian injuries and fatalities.
So, clarify, you say that's a recommendation to make it 25?
It's a recommendation for the project team to consider because it would require a design variance to do so.
So it's not a part of the conditions of approval, though, right?
It is not a part of the conditions of approval.
Yet you're recommending it, or should we add that to the conditions
That's
if we agree with it?
That is up to the commission.
So if, in that case, we would recommend a design speed of 30 miles an hour with a posted speed of 25.
Correct. If the commission agreed with the recommendation, then they would be free to add that condition.
Can the petitioner's representative comment on that? That particular idea?
Anytime you're dealing with a project that's an arterial, it's a balancing act. The whole purpose behind the official streets and highways plan is to identify the road system in our city so that it functions properly. And what that means is you have neighborhood streets leading to collectors, you have collectors leading to arterials, and each of those roadways has different functions. The function of an arterial is primarily to move traffic from point A to point B. In this particular instance, at this particular location, given the current uses, which are subject to change, there is a high pedestrian volume in that area. However, if you, and I apologize, if you look at the volumes, it's about 8,000 vehicles, okay? That's also one-way traffic. And if you look at the vehicle volumes that are provided in Title 21 and in the Design Criteria Manual for comparison purposes, those assume two-way traffic. So while the volumes do appear to be a little low compared to other arterial volumes, it's an arterial. It's got a lot of trucks on it. It's got a lot of cars on it. It's the purpose behind the roadway is to move traffic from point A to point B. When you start artificially messing with the speeds of those vehicles, you change the characteristics of the roadway. It's no longer, people don't drive it anymore because it's not functioning as an arterial. It's not designed as an arterial. It's designed as more of a collector or a local road type thing. So when you start artificially changing things, it convolutes the whole process. I would need to request a design waiver, and I would need to support that with sound engineering judgment to reduce the speed in this area. I have not done that. Because I believe that we can accommodate the uses in the area, the pedestrian crossing in the area, and the high pedestrian volumes in the area using the SEPDED principles and good engineering design without having to reduce the speed in that area, because you would be going from other stretches of roadway to a reduced speed area and increasing again. So the reason it's not incorporated is because as a design engineer, it's my job to figure out ways around keeping within the criteria that are necessary for the arterial and then making all of the other parts work as well, which is why we've hired a bunch of experts to help us, including Brian's firm, to do the lighting design.
I appreciate that comment. There is, however, if I remember correctly, pretty significant difference between 25 mile an hour and 35 miles an hour as far as the impact with regard to injuries on pedestrians. Substantial difference. Of course, that doesn't really help if they're violating the speed limit, but I think that would be nice to have some information on that for us to make a decision regarding the 25 versus the 30. As I understand, huge difference as far as the severity of the injuries, the percentage of fatalities between 25 and 30. And I don't have that information right at my fingertips, but I just recently read something about that, and I think it's pretty significant. It would be nice to have that in this as maybe a staff report or somewhere if this is really an issue.
Well,
We have right there, don't we?
actually, I can also provide some additional information with respect to that.
I am wrong.
There is a substantial difference in the impact of pedestrian versus vehicle crashes between 25 and 30 miles per hour. However, for every study that shows that, I can show you a study that says that if I artificially reduce the speed limit in that area, the speeds aren't going to change. So posting it at 25 miles an hour isn't going to really accomplish anything. It's going to create, in some respects, a false sense of security. And again, if I've done my job correctly, and if all the folks helping me have done their jobs correctly, we've created a much safer pedestrian environment than currently exists. I don't know if you've been out there. There's no lighting. It's dim, it's dark, it's up a hill. It's really wide, especially for, again, the volumes that are going through there. As we go through and we increase the lighting, as we shorten up the ped crossing areas, as we raise the visibility of the pedestrians in the area, and we incorporate these sub-dead principles to keep folks moving where they're supposed to be moving, all of those tools are going to increase the pedestrian safety more than artificially lowering the speed limit to 25 would, if that makes sense. In my professional engineering opinion, I believe that.
I have another question, but I'll wait for the other people to have a chance.
Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you. I was just going to ask, when we're talking about traffic volume, I just wanted to confirm my understanding of the information in the report. And I think you mentioned roughly 8,000, let me find the page I'm looking at here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, 8,000 vehicles is kind of the number we're talking about, but there's just a note here that says truck traffic and commercial traffic. Volume data is not available, and I guess I interpret that to mean that the 8,000, some subset of that 8,000 is commercial traffic, but we don't know exactly how the split is, or is commercial traffic some unknown number on top of the 8,000?
That number does incorporate the truck traffic, and for general discussion purposes, you typically assume somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5% trucks.
Okay.
Unless you do a specific truck count, when you're talking general engineering kind of guessing, that's what we use is about 5%. And in this particular route, I would say probably in the neighborhood of 1% to 2% is heavy vehicles. I mean, not like panel trucks, but like big semis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just kind of a general rule of thumb that engineers use when we're just starting to look at things and figure them out.
Not for that area.
You think that number's low? Excuse me, you think that number's low?
I was there every day this summer.
Really?
Yes,
Do you mind if I ask why, just because I'm curious?
taking my wife to work.
Okay, cool.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, I think some of the comments from community councils talked about physical barrier between the vehicles and the pedestrians. And if the sidewalk is shown all the way to the back of the curb, do you have some ideas for how you would protect that interface?
Through the chair, I do. Actually, if you've been down there recently, as you're going along 3rd Avenue from east to west, you kind of go up a hill just before you get to Ingra. On the right-hand side, there's actually railing that separates the pedestrian facility, because at that point in time, the pedestrian facility is attached to the roadway. And we're hoping to coordinate with street maintenance and all of the user groups and things like that, but to look at putting in something that would still allow for visibility, but would actually provide, I can't say a physical barrier because you can't build a wall big enough, but look at something along those lines to see if that would facilitate. But again, I have a SEPDED expert who's going to be helping me figure those types of things out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
I think the example that I was thinking of is going down Spinard towards East Chester. There's an actual concrete Jersey barrier dividing the pedestrian trail from and it's comforting to have that there where there's, a 30 or 35 mile an hour speed zone.
That would also be an alternative we would look at. However, I have been told that Jersey barriers are favorite places for sitting. And so unless we can incorporate some sort of a facade or treatment along the top of the Jersey barrier to prevent sitting, my guess is that we'll be looking at something a little less comfortable.
Great. And then one more question.
Sure.
bicycle traffic, how will it be accommodated?
The bicycle plan actually indicates that it's twofold. It's to have the multi-use trail, which again, we're talking about an expanded pedestrian facility of some form on the north side of the roadway that is already there. We're probably going to mess with the arrangement a little bit to make it work. And then it's also share the road is what it's designated as in the bike plan, and so we'll be incorporating the appropriate signing and striping for that as well.
Share the road, meaning that it's intended that bicycles share the road with vehicle traffic, not on the...
That is correct. They will not have a designated bike lane.
Thanks.
Commissioner Looney?
Yes, thank you. I definitely concur with the point you're making, I guess, just to clarify, is, well, this is unique, but the artificially lowering the speed limit to, say, 25 without making some physical changes is just not going to work, and you realize that also. So I think that really this project is, in my mind, it's a road diet, going from 3 lanes, really wide, to 2 lanes. And it's got to help. It will help with the reducing the speeds, I think. Without doing something like that, you really can't just slap up a sign like and expect people to drive at some 25 miles an hour. I was surprised at the 2010 bike plan to show this section of road to, like you just noted, that this is a shared use. What's the right term? I guess it's shared lane, I guess, with bikes.
I think it called it a shared use facility or something like that.
So it's one of the last
I actually checked it twice because I didn't think it was right the first time.
Yeah, because it kind of, this is a truck route, like, it's a freight route. And it's uphill, so you're going to be going slower on a bike, and all the stuff going on there at high speeds. It's probably the last place in town I want to be in the lane. So normally I'd be saying, wow, you know what, let's add a shoulder to this corridor. Because as people probably know, I like shoulders and bike facilities, but this is, everything's a balance. If we really want to reduce the speeds, like Commissioner Spring made it so clear that it is important to reduce speeds, you really need to kind of have that road diet feel. So that's where the current cross-section that's recommended shows, I think, 12.5-foot lanes with really no shoulder or minimal shoulder at all. You really have to do that if you're going to have a realistic impact to speeds. So normally I would be all about add shoulders, but I think with the priority for the pedestrian safety on this one, I support the recommended alternative.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spring?
Yeah, this is in response to, I think, Brian's comment. I've seen a lot of road, diets like this one, which involve a shoulder. And I understand that a lot of times a shoulder, which is striped, of course, helps to reduce the speed even more because there's the impact of that narrower width. Plus, I think the shoulder, I would like to consider the shoulder a little bit more in depth because I think, as you said, the multi-use path is right abutting the street, and in some places because the police they can't arrest or they can't get people off the green space between the road and the sidewalk, right? But so I'll buy that it has to be abutting the street. But I think for the safety, the comfort of the pedestrians and the bicyclists, I think a little space would be good between the travel lane and the multi-use path. And I recognize that in your design study report, your rationale was that it would reduce the crossing width distance and would improve the safety of the crossing. But in my opinion, I guess, 4 feet, is that really going to make that much difference? I mean, if it has other positive benefits like giving more comfort to the people on the multi-use trail. One other comment, and I'll let you say something instead of me just talking. That area, as you know, has got so many people walking down there along that multi-use path right by Beans. I mean, the places, you can't even go past them on a bike sometimes, I think. And in fact, I don't know how, doesn't really work as a bike facility because of that, I think. Because bicyclists, if they're commuting like Brian, they want to zip along and get where they want to go. They don't want to stop and weave around pedestrians. And besides, there's a lot of speed differential between pedestrians and bicyclists anyway. It seems like I'd like to see more thought about how to treat bicycles along this corridor. And that's why I think originally I said, why not take it to the Bike and Ped Committee at AMATS, get their feedback. I feel much more comfortable that the design that's in the 35% design study report met, the requirements and the needs for the pedestrians and bicyclists. Not that I don't think you did a bad job, I just think it needs maybe a little bit more thought and maybe a little bit more input.
Through the chair. Actually, we had conversations with respect to shoulders and increased comfort levels with respect to both the vehicles and the pedestrians. And our solution was to increase the width of the pedestrian facilities. Rather than increasing the crossing distance for the roadway, we looked at putting a bigger than normal sidewalk on both sides of the roadway so that the separation does exist. It's just not in the road, it's in the pedestrian facility. Does that make sense? So we have taken a look at some of the issues that you raise. I don't know that we're going to be able to address, again, as Commissioner Looney indicated, it's a balancing act for bicycles. We're trying to put in big enough facilities that we can accommodate all of the uses per the bike plan, and the simplest way to do that and still maintain the narrow crossing width that we're looking at is to increase the size of pedestrian facilities. So if you look, we're proposing 10-foot, if I remember correctly, it's 5 foot is actually what's required, and we're actually proposing 10 feet on both sides. 5 or 6 feet is what's required, and so we've added in that comfort separation by increasing the size of the pedestrian facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson? Commissioner Looney? Commissioner Anderson then.
I was in the queue from before as well.
Similarly for Commissioner Gardner?
No, I've got a new kind of question or comment, I guess. And that's just to say that when I first read through this, I noticed there's one of the subsections of the code that kind of governs our review here. It talks about reviewing alternative designs. And an item I noted was that the 3 alternatives that you proposed, it looks like the first 2 were really never really kind of adequate considerations, the one just staying at the same, and that didn't incorporate the changes you wanted to make for pedestrian safety. And then the second alternative didn't have anything on the other side, which I think it said was not consistent with code, and so was ruled out for that way. And I think it would be helpful, hearing this discussion about different options for a shoulder or different sidewalk widths. For me, I think I would find it helpful to see that type of discussion played out and alternatives in this application for us to review and kind of see that process that you're telling us about now, to be able to evaluate that in the application itself and consider those different designs. So I don't know that anything needs to be made of that at the moment, or if I'm maybe misunderstanding this process in some way, but I think for me that would be helpful to see that information for the alternatives.
Through the chair, if I come back, I can guarantee the next one I do for you guys will have that type of information in it.
Okay, thank you.
And you done, Commissioner Gardner? Commissioner Strike?
Thank you again through the chair. So in looking at the sidewalk area down there, expanding the width of the sidewalk on both sides, my experience down there has been these sidewalks aren't being used as pedestrian walkways. They're being used as pedestrian campways. They're used for staging areas for waiting until Beans or Brother Francis opens up in the morning so they can get in early because they didn't stay, or they're in there in the evening. But they're camped all along the streets right there coming off the hillsides, the adjacent properties migrating out. So they're not walking. They're camping. So what you've done in going from 5.5 feet, 6 feet wide to 10 feet is giving more areas to wait, to camp, and so forth. But I'm also heard earlier that this is the only area that the APD can enforce. Can't enforce it when they're on adjacent property, pedestrians or the personnel when they're on the private property. That would be trespassing, and they're not there to enforce that. But they can do the loitering if they're on the sidewalk. How many tents have you seen camped on the sidewalk? I've seen them. They're there in the mornings.
I can only tell you that the code allows for enforcement on sidewalk and pedestrian facilities, but it does not allow for enforcement in areas that are not developed. So the areas behind the back of sidewalk and the areas in between the back of curb and sidewalk for separated facilities are unenforceable.
Which is why some of the property owners built fences and did other means trying to discourage.
And private property is a whole other thing. I'm talking about exclusively within the right-of-way, because honestly, I don't know the rules on private property. I'm only familiar with the rules in the right-of-way.
Well, I'm talking about the second largest property owner that's sitting there adjacent to the property, that property, Grubstake. And we heard over and over and over, in fact, all of the issues of Brother Francis and so forth, and this issue in here, all of those have been public hearings. The rezoning for this area was a public hearing. This is the only case that I've recognized in the last 5.5 years that I've been on the commission that's come before us in this area that hasn't been a public hearing.
I believe all of the cases that you cited had to do with private property, and this case is exclusively within the right-of-way. At least that would be the only guess that I could hazard, because I don't know why this is different than those.
Thank you.
Seeing no other commissioners in the queue, what is the will of the body?
Sit down.
Motion by Commissioner Strike.
I'm going to make a motion, not in concurrence with this, but I'm going to make a motion that this action be tabled and that it be directed into a public hearing, as it is within the purview of the commission to do so, as stipulated, as identified. The design that has been met is not complete for us to be able to fully recognize what may or may not occur. There is no other body to protect the citizens as to what might take place between the city and the private property owners. And so I would like to see a public process be utilized here and move that this be directed into a public hearing.
Commissioner Spinelli.
I was fully willing to support the plan. I thought Ms. Radvansky's answers to the questions made sense in my mind. However, if the will of the body is to do a public hearing, I'm okay with that, so I'd be happy to go along with that. I'd like to hear what everyone had to say.
Commissioner Spring.
If we have a public hearing, we may not get much more information. I think we'd probably get Brother Francis Shelter there, maybe a property owner. What I would like, I think it's a good idea, but I think it would be good that we ensure that we get additional information that would be useful in making our decision. And one of the things I've been talking about is having better input on bike and ped facilities. I just don't see it in this report, and I don't think there's been enough thought about it. I would like to see that prior to the public hearing that, and I'll make a motion if I get the feeling that it could be supported, that it go to the AMAT's Bike and Ped Committee for review and their recommendation prior to the public hearing. I would like...
Are you making a motion?
I'll make that motion, yes. I would like to make that motion. Whether it passes or not, we'll see.
We may need you to restate that for the record. And would this be an amendment?
It'd be, yeah. I intended it to be an amendment unless the motion maker will agree that it does. Probably should be an amendment.
I believe that you can vote on the current motion that's on the table, and his motion that he would wish to make would still be able to follow up, with or without. If, in the event my motion were to fail, his motion is still relevant.
But in the event that your motion would pass, we would not be able to vote on Commissioner Spring's motion.
This is still considered a main motion.
Then I would consider the amendment to Mr. Spring, Commissioner Spring, if he would restate it.
As part of the main motion.
As part of the main motion.
So would I be interpreting the motion correctly that the motion is to table this current proceeding for a public hearing whereby at that time, additional information will be provided as far as pedestrian and bicycle?
With a recommendation from the AMAT's Ped and Bike Committee.
Right, so by the...
Review and recommendation.
So to clarify it, it's by the public hearing, there will be a recommendation by AMAT's Ped and Bicycle Committee.
Yes. Yeah. Can I comment on the motion? Madam Chair?
Excuse me, what was that?
Could I comment on the motion?
Let me see if we need any more clarification on the motion first. Just the bike and ped was the only thing that was in the motion. Yes, you can comment on your motion.
Yeah, one of the things, the reason I mentioned that a little change there is because the AMATS is in the middle of revising their trails plan, which includes ped and bicycle, and it may be that they're making some recommendations for changes to that, if it's not approved necessarily, but they could. Maybe there's some improvements to the existing plan. Also, the existing plan shows this corridor as a primary bicycle corridor. And the original plan in 2010 identified what are the most utilized routes that needs to form the core of the bicycle network. And 3rd Avenue is one of those. So that's another reason why I think additional concern, additional thought should be made regarding bike and ped in this area.
Thank you, Commissioner Spring. Commissioner Anderson?
I tend to agree with Commissioner Spring that I don't know that we'll get a lot of useful information out of a public hearing or public comment, but I do feel like at 35% level of design, we should have identified the major components of the design and the components from the CPTED-S seem to be missing, and it would be nice to understand those. I think the component that deals with the bicycle traffic and how it relates to AMAT's bicycle and pedestrian plan should be identified, and at least some concept level descriptions of what those would look like, as well as the pedestrian crossing. So I think, the current motion with the amendment is to include a public hearing and have some more information by 35%. I think I could support that, but I could also support a similar amendment that got away with the public hearing portion of it and just required additional information to meet a 35% level scope of work.
Commissioner Strike?
Yes, and to clarify too, my motion on the floor does not negate the continuation of the design, but will offer the opportunity that during the public process that design will be better and more flushed out to address, for example, the CPTEDS issues and the bike issues, and that is my intent there. And it's not to stop the design in its tracks, but to afford the public then to have its bite at the apple, so to speak, as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner?
Yeah, I think I agree generally with the comments that Commissioner Anderson just made. I definitely would like to see some more information to better understand the impact and effects on bicycle and pedestrian traffic. I'm kind of ambivalent as to the public hearing. I think I agree also that I'm not sure how much more information we would get from it, although in my brief experience here, this area has seemed to be somewhat more kind of controversial part of town with respect to any changes, and so I'm not opposed to giving people an opportunity to weigh in. I would like to ask staff, though, to make sure we understand if we do grant the main motion and kind of have a public hearing on this, what effect that has on the design process going forward.
So a public hearing at the next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting could delay the design process, but I'm not sure to what extent. I would defer to PM&E on that question.
Okay. I think I'd be curious to hear what the petitioner's thoughts are on an effect, or how a public hearing might affect the process. Or unless...
Sorry, we thought we were done. Through the chair, I'm sorry. The intent is to construct the project this year. Excuse me, not this year, this next coming construction season. If we delay the design by a month, I can't bid this project until probably the end of July. As it stands right now, because we've already slid a month due to a miscommunication, an additional month in delay of the design is probably going to mean that we won't be able to construct the project next summer. We will be pushing it to the summer after.
Commissioner Looney?
Yeah, I guess I guess on timing-wise, I'm pretty sure that the AMAT's Bike and Ped group only meets quarterly. So I guess we'll have to figure the logistics of that, whether they can meet on a special case like this, I don't know. But regarding the particulars for this, I mentioned earlier how I thought that the alternatives cross-section C looked pretty good. And I guess we had quite a bit of a discussion here about the need for bike lanes, and I see that the balance between, keeping a narrow road that's going to discourage speeding. But if I look at the numbers of the lane widths and see that it's currently alternative C has 25 feet of asphalt. If you were just to reconfigure that, rather than two 12.5-foot lanes, if you added one more foot of asphalt, you could have two 11-foot lanes and a 4-foot shoulder on one side. So that would have the bike lane that we think that has value. So in a way, it's just a 1-foot wider cross-section. Maybe still keep the roadway on a diet, but it may meet the requirement for having a bike lane, one direction. Am I missing something there?
Truck traffic.
Truck traffic, so you need 12-foot lanes for the trucks? Okay, so, add 3 feet of asphalt then, I guess. But, and I understand the predicament where it's a balance between the road diet, which is going to discourage speeding, and having all this room for all these different users. But I will say, there's one place where I don't want to ride a bike, is on an uphill with a bunch of trucks, kind of thing. So that's, but also, I understand Commissioner Strike's point in that so many these sidewalks will probably be busy with either people standing or camping, so it may not be the place I want to bike either. So it's a predicament. If we really say that we're prioritizing pedestrians with this, not so much the bikers, then the design you have looks pretty good to me. But if you really want to bring into the fold more bikers, then an on-street bike lane is appropriate.
Commissioner Spinelli.
I guess my question is for PM&E staff, Mr. Advansky. If the commission were to have you come back for a public hearing at 65% design with our concerns addressed, would that slow your schedule down?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Whitfield with respect to that, because the CSS process that's in code is currently directs us to provide you with a DSR and 35% design. And so if we were to add an additional step to that process, I'm not sure. I would defer to, it's their process. So I'm not sure how to answer your question. It would add time to my project, yes, because it would add in I also have to go to UDC at 65%. So to incorporate your public hearing plus the UDC review at 65% would slow my project down. I can't state how much because I don't know exactly how the timing is going to play out, because this isn't something that we anticipated because it's not part of the CSS process. This would be above and beyond that.
Then one more follow-up on that before Dave weighs in. Is there a public hearing at UDC?
He's shaking his head no, so.
Okay. All right.
And to clarify, I'm next on the queue.
Commissioner Strike?
Your project can't start until after the utility improvements have already been incorporated and completed. They don't happen concurrent. So AWWU's schedule right now is for this project not even to take place, most likely until midsummer.
Most of the AWWU project, I believe, was completed, and what they're doing is they're slip lining.
Is what?
My understanding was that they were at least working on their project, and their project is a slip lining project, which means the only place where they're actually disturbing any earth is at the structures. And I haven't checked with them recently. Actually, do you know?
They're complete.
But, yeah, I believe AWU is done through there. So the only other utility that we would be coordinating with as part of our project is ML&P, and they have a project that starts, and I apologize, I might not be perfect on this. They have a project that starts at Post and goes all the way into downtown somewhere. We're approximately a third of their project. But in our project corridor, they did a project several years ago, and they actually have conduit in the ground. So they can actually do their undergrounding project in conjunction with, and it is our intent to actually bid the projects together, so that they'll be using the existing conduit, pulling their underground utilities at the same time we're doing the surface work.
Because MLP was looking to put their power underground.
They have a project on their books that they were actually hoping to construct in 18, and they agreed to put it off until 19 so that we could work together, because as part of their project, they're going to be taking down the existing lighting such as it is, and we didn't want there to be no lighting in the area, so we asked them to put their project off for a year, and they did so that as they take their lighting down, we can be putting our lighting up, if that makes sense. And to the best of my knowledge, there are no other utility projects in the corridor that are identified.
Seeing no other commissioners in the queue, call for vote. This is on the amendment?
This is amendment? Oh, I thought it was incorporated into, the motion maker incorporated into his motion.
I thought we amended
It was basically a friendly amendment, I believe.
And just to be clear, can we have Commissioner Strike restate his motion, just so that everyone is clear what we're voting on?
The motion was to table what's before us today to move to a public hearing to address the lack of information and to provide for a public process as we're on this, what's been proposed to us. Further amended by Commissioner Springs.
It was not amended, though. It was adopted by you.
Adopted.
Adopted to seek AMAT input and recommendations regarding bike and pedestrian facilities prior to that public hearing.
That was 30 minutes ago.
Now we know.
All right, just so everyone's clear, that is the singular motion in front of us today. You may vote.
That's what we did. That's why you're doing your job. Thank you. Now you rejected it. You changed it. Where'd it go?
I believe we did need 5 votes. Is that correct? We did need 5 votes. We received 5 votes, so the motion passes.
Loser. Loser.
And we'll call for a short recess so that we can retrieve our last commission member. Perfect.
Sitting here, like, yeah.
I regret my decision of forcing you to recuse yourself.
There you go.
Just so you know, you get a second bite at the apple. Now he's bit.
Guys. All right, next item is a public hearing item, case 2018-0107, Costco Wholesale Corporation, a major site plan review for their location on Dubar Road. I'll read the procedure by which the public may speak at our meeting. After the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the commission rules of procedure. Petitioners, including his or her representatives, get 10 minutes. Representatives of groups such as community councils, 5 minutes. Individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions about the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. So with that, could we start with the staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for a major site plan review to amend the site plan of a large retail sales establishment, Costco, by adding an additional parking lot to the southeast of the main retail facility. Costco has noticed increased traffic with the recent statewide closure of Sam's Club, a direct competitor. This parking lot is intended to primarily serve as employee parking and provide users with safe pedestrian access to the employee entrance located on the southeast corner of the main retail facility. Locating the employee parking to a separate lot will open up additional parking spaces for Costco customers. The Planning Department has reviewed this request and presents the following findings. The Planning Department believes that criteria 1 is met. This property is subject to the special limitations established by Assembly Ordinance 88-146 and the conditions of the previous major site plan review. Special limitations imposed on this site require a public hearing site plan review by the Planning and Zoning Commission prior to any development of the property. Criteria 2 is partially met. This development is in keeping with the intent of the B3 district and compliance with applicable use-specific standards for parking lot are met through conditions. The site plan is in compliance with Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 21, Chapter 6, subsection 020B, Table of Dimensional Standards, Commercial and Industrial Districts. And compliance with Chapter 7 is met through the following criteria for snow disposal. In accordance with Anchorage Municipal Code, snow storage and disposal, a total of 5% of paved surface area on site shall be dedicated to snow storage. The paved surface area totals 27,215 square feet, of which 1,361 square feet shall be dedicated for snow storage. The submitted site plans do not show any dedicated snow storage areas. However, snow will be jointly managed between the site and the main retail site in accordance with Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 21, Chapter 7, subsection 040F3C. To demonstrate that the main retail site can accommodate this additional snow load, the petitioner shall provide to planning snow storage calculations showing existing snow storage capacity at the main retail site, factoring in the additional 1,361 square feet of snow storage area needed on the new development site. In regards to landscaping, the standard is partially met. The submitted landscape plan demonstrates partial compliance with Anchorage Municipal Code. Dubar Road is classified as a Class 3 major arterial by the 2014 Official Streets and Highways Plan. As such, this site shall install visual enhancement landscaping along the southern lot line abutting Dubar Road. There is existing vegetation within the platted 15-foot landscape buffer along the southern lot line that will serve as the required landscaping. However, it is unclear in the submitted plans whether or not the existing landscaping meets an L1 standard. The petitioner shall provide a landscape plan or survey to the Planning Department, which confirms whether or not the existing vegetation along the southern lot boundary meets an L1 standard. The petitioner shall be required to install additional landscaping if the existing vegetation does not meet an L1 standard. Additionally, parking lots with over 10 parking spaces shall install perimeter landscaping to an L1 standard along all applicable lot lines. Landscaping along the western property line is not shown in the submitted landscape plan. The petitioner intends to enter into a common development plan with the municipality to provide continuity with the existing landscaping installed on the main retail site. In regards to off-street parking, there are currently 731 parking spots available at the main retail site. This parking lot will add 80 parking spaces to the Costco site plan. With this addition, there will be 811 parking spaces on site. For a store with 164,370 square feet of gross floor area for general retail, the minimum number of parking spaces required is 470. With the addition of this new parking lot, the minimum parking requirement will be exceeded by 341 spaces. Retail stores are allowed to provide more parking than required, but they cannot exceed maximum parking limitations established by Anchorage Municipal Code. This site exceeds the maximum allowed parking spaces by 154 parking spaces when factoring in the allowable maximum number of spaces. Exceptions to allowable parking maximums can be obtained from the traffic engineer and director if the approval criteria of Anchorage Municipal Code Title 21, Chapter 7, subsection 090E4E is met. As a condition of approval, the petitioner shall obtain a parking exception from the traffic engineer and director to exceed the maximum allowable parking spaces for this use. The standards for on-site pedestrian walkways are not met. The pedestrian foot traffic accessing Costco from Dubar and users of the new parking lot have an existing paved walkway running the length of the western lot line of the parking lot for access to additional pedestrian facilities surrounding the main retail site. This walkway will lead pedestrians to a paved island which previously served as interior parking lot landscaping. In the submitted site plan, there is a striped pedestrian travel lane from the existing walkway to the island, but there is no striping leading from the island to the pedestrian facilities abutting the main retail building. To provide continuous on-site pedestrian access, it shall be a condition of approval that the petitioner provide to planning a revised site plan which shows a continuous pedestrian connection from the new development site to the existing pedestrian facilities abutting the main retail site. The submitted site plan is not compliant with the standards of Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 21, Chapter 7, subsection 090J, accessible parking spaces. For a parking lot with 80 spaces, 4 ADA accessible spaces must be provided, with one being van accessible. As a condition of approval, the petitioner shall provide to planning a revised site plan showing the development of 4 ADA accessible spaces, with one being van accessible in accordance with the standards of Anchorage Municipal Code. And I would also like to point out that there is a provision for large retail sales establishments. That's Title 21, Chapter 7, subsection 120. And the Planning Department is not requiring any additional improvements beyond what was mentioned in the staff report because the cost estimates of the project are below 10% of the assessed value of the existing structure. So there shouldn't be any additional movement towards conformance. For criteria 3, the standard is met. The parking lot is not anticipated to create adverse impacts on the surrounding uses, which are majority commercial. And criteria 4, the standard is met. The petition site is classified as Main Street Corridor, Transit Supportive Development per the 2040 Anchorage Land Use Plan map, and general commercial per the 2014 East Anchorage District Plan, East Anchorage District Land Use map. The proposed use of parking lot is consistent with these designations. The site plan is also consistent with the following policies of the comprehensive plan. Policies number 21, 43, and 49. And the department recommends approval of the site plan amendment subject to the following conditions and those amended by staff. Earlier before the meeting, commissioners did receive a additional packet to go along with this agenda item that has some amended conditions. Those are amendments to conditions 5 and 6. And those are the conditions that the Planning Department is recommending be passed by the Commission tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you. Question from Mr. Strike. Go ahead.
Thank you. And in regards to your comment on Section 21-07-120, the large establishments, and that additional site improvements were not necessary or being required because it did not reach 10% of the assessed value. A question I have is, and it's more procedural, not necessarily particular to this case, but let's look at this case. Can a developer phase their improvements in such a way to avoid that additional improvements by splitting up their improvements? For example, this one here is at $500,000 value, and so it doesn't meet the 10% threshold, but two prior improvements were to add the tire center and add the fueling station, which all happened independently of each other. If you take a look at them in the aggregate, they're greater than the 10%. Now, I believe the tire center and the fueling center occurred before this part of the code came into place. So my question is, do we look at the aggregate moving forward so that developers don't game the system to the point of avoiding that additional uplift because of the value of their improvements?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, currently in code, this is the only method we have, is to treat it on a project-by-project basis. We don't really have a way to examine past projects and include that, or anticipated projects for that matter. So it's just on a project-by-project basis as it comes before us. That's the way that we evaluate this.
I would just offer up to your department that there could be a loophole here that a smart developer could phase a number of different improvements in a manner to avoid that total, avoid the big box store requirements and trigger that clause. We saw that with the Sears Seritage, and we saw that with the Karagotstein buildings on the REI. But a little bit of phasing, you've got a loophole here.
It's not just on big box, it's any non-conforming property, and it's pretty much standard practice in Anchorage. I mean, it is. Otherwise, you get nailed with it all. But good point.
Okay, thank you.
Strike, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, through the chair, what is the approval criteria for parking to exceed the maximum? What are we talking about here?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, do you want me to read it from code?
That'd be fine. That'd be good. I didn't bring my Title 21.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute here to look that up.
Oh, is it in there? Oh. But you stated that there's approval criteria, so by traffic could waive it. What do they have to determine to?
You're saying, is it anything more specific than they just have to approve it?
Well, it states that, the condition said that it has to go to traffic for their approval that it meets the criteria for exceeding the maximum number.
210709E4E.
Right, there's
Gotcha.
the code. Do you have that?
Yes. So there are two approval criteria. That's going to be A and B, so I'll read off A first. The applicant provides a parking demand study of similar sites in the municipality that demonstrates that parking demand cannot be accommodated within the maximum number of parking spaces allowed or through any of the available parking reductions and alternatives such as on-street parking, shared parking with nearby uses, or incentives for alternatives to single occupancy vehicle use. And so this will be approval criteria B. The request is the minimum necessary variation from the standards.
Okay. I mean, I'm not sure I disagree they don't need it. I just wondered that. How come then, I don't understand why you recommend changing the condition of approval to resolve with traffic when it's clear that they have to do it, right? So why are we saying resolve? Why not use the original language, obtain a waiver from the traffic department?
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Spring. So That was, it's kind of twofold. For one, there's the potential for non-conforming rights for an excess of parking spaces, which is kind of an unusual scenario, but it happens. And then second was just a request from the applicant to change that to a strict obtain a parking exception, instead resolve with the traffic engineer and director the need to. We felt to recommend that a change because in the end, if the traffic engineer and the director both come to the conclusion that a parking exception is not needed for XYZ reasons, we will still have that documented, and there will be a sign-off associated with that. But in the end, more than likely, a parking exception is going to be necessary and will be obtained and have to be agreed upon by the municipal traffic engineer and the director.
Okay, so it won't be just their arbitrary decision as to whether or not we think it's fine. They have to meet it has to be non-conforming or something, special exception. Or something.
That's correct. It
Okay.
just provides a slightly more flexibility to the applicant while still achieving the same outcome.
Okay, I guess I'm okay with that. One more question through the chair, if I could.
Go ahead.
What are the requirements or the prohibitions against storage containers, or what do you call them, connex? Yeah, in the code? Is there a prohibition? Because I see them all over the place. It doesn't seem like there is. Can you tell me if there is?
Thank you, through the chair. So they are referred to as intermodal shipping containers in code, and they're an accessory use, and they do have their own use-specific standards. They can fit into multiple different zoning districts subject to use-specific standards, and those are usually, they have to be in a lot of a certain size. If they're in a residential district, they have to be cited. If they're in a commercial and industrial district, of course, those requiremements are a little more lax. But going beyond that, I guess I could speak more specifically if you had a certain scenario in mind or a...
Well, I guess the question is, if I could, through the chair, could they be placed on this parking lot?
Through the chair, I believe on a temporary basis, that would be a temporary use that would be allowed on that parking lot, but it would require additional approval from the municipality for that temporary use.
Beyond the temporary use? They would require approval beyond the temporary use? Or it would require approval for a temporary use?
For both, Mr. Spring. So temporary use, they would need approval from the municipality for that.
And I wonder what temporary means.
There's a variety of different timelines in code. Sometimes it's 90 days, sometimes it's 120, sometimes it's 180. I can't speak specifically as to what that would be defined as, but I believe it's 90 days,
okay.
No greater than 180.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gardner.
Just banged my elbow, sorry. Need a second to compose myself. I guess my question was, I was hoping you could explain for me, and I don't know if it relates to exactly what the petition site is that we're looking at here or something else, but I didn't entirely understand kind of how the counting was done in some of these, I guess I'll say factors that we were looking at, because for purposes of the parking spaces that we were just talking about, it looks like we're looking at the entire lot, but for the analysis for the number of ADA compliant spots, it looks like that calculation was done by just looking at the site, I think. And I guess I'm just not sure why, for one, we're looking at the entire parking lot, and for the other, we're not. If that makes sense.
Yes, through the chair, Mr. Gardner. So there are provisions in code specific to Title 21, Chapter 7, subsection 090J12, which touches on if you have a parking lot on a principal lot that is not serving as required parking for another use that's adjacent or abutting, ADA spaces must be provided in accordance with municipal code. So that's where you get the requirement and that calculation of 4 ADA spaces for the 80 parking spaces being developed. However, with the amendment that we are proposing for condition number 5, through a common development agreement, they would be able to factor in the entire site and then use that for their ADA parking calculation.
Okay, well, I guess I'll look at that section of the code. I'm not sure I entirely understand, but I'll take you at your word that those numbers make sense. Thank you.
Mr. Spring?
The bicycle parking requirements in Title 21, I think those were added in the last amendment. And if I remember right, I don't remember how it was formulated. Is it per a ratio of parking spaces to bicycle parking? And if it is, then would this require additional bicycle parking? And a follow-up question, just to overdo it, maybe the petitioner's representative knows this. How many parking spaces are there currently for bicycles?
I've never seen one.
I don't think there's any.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I can't answer the question on how many bicycle parking spaces are required are currently on site. I'll defer to the petitioner on that. As far as bicycle parking spaces, I'm going to read that through code here. Shall provide at least 4 bicycle parking spaces and a number of bicycle parking spaces equal to 3% of the number of required automobile parking spaces, whichever is greater. So it's 3%.
3% of the required, but not the actual.
That's correct. It's 3% of required.
I think I wrote that part of the code wrong. Oh, can I go back and rewrite that? Never mind.
So how many would that be? How many would that be, John?
What's that?
How many would it be?
I don't know. I think Brian figured it out.
If it's the actual is 24, but if the required is 470, so more like 15.
I got 2 questions, and we'll go to public hearing. These questions may actually seem contradictory. The first one is, if all we're really evaluating is this additional parking spaces, all of which exceed the maximum requirement, why is it just not a threshold requirement to see this determination before we can even accept the application? The determination from the traffic engineer that it's even something they'd consider. I mean, why don't we start there? It just seems like you can't even pass go unless you have that, that determination. And I think my second question is, why are we seeing this at all? Why is it not just administrative? If in fact we're not kicking in 10%, we're not looking at anything in addition to this parking lot itself. The parking lot is just basically being designed to meet landscaping code and use common development agreements to sort of meet that. There's nothing additionally for us to sort of determine, anything part of that 10% where we could actually have some discretion of what's the biggest bang for the buck. So why is there not an out clause or some sort of administrative clause that sort of skips all this stuff? Unless it's just because the zoning has an SL related to a site, the site plan, and that might be the only compelling kind of idea for me.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll take the easy question first, which is question number 2. So it's twofold. So one, first and foremost, the special limitations imposed on the property explicitly state any new development on this property shall be a public hearing site plan review, regardless of the scope of that development or what it is. Okay. At some point in time, the public saw that was necessary to put that in.
So if that zoning wasn't on there, would this big box have been able to administratively approve the site plan? Do you know?
Well, parking lots as a B3 within the B3 are permitted.
Right, but there's the big box ordinance, right? So do you know?
Correct. So because it would be a amendment to a large retail sales establishment, it would have to go before the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay. On that threshold question that I had, the first one.
And on the threshold question, I'll admit, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question other than, it's like the chicken before the egg. Do you give permission for the design, or do you give the design and then permission?
It's just their discretion whether they want to move it forward or not. It's sort of like the only thing of interest that I would actually like to see related to it, because it's really the only discretionary part of the review. But anyhow, okay, thanks, Ryan. Anyone else for questions for staff? Okay, at this point, I'd like to invite Mr. Potter forward as petitioner.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, all great questions. My name is Tim Potter with Dowell. With me tonight is Brad Doggett, a civil engineer with Dowell, and Peter Kahn with Costco Company, who has flown up and is in town tonight to answer any specific questions that you may have. First off, I think I'll go backwards to how I would usually do this. I would simply like to say that in working with the staff, we have no problem and are accepting of all of the conditions of approval as proposed for amendment tonight, number 5 and 6 with the staff. So we're good with those as proposed to be amended. So now let's step into the history. In 1988, for Weyerhaeuser Mortgage Company, who had foreclosed this property from Pete Zamorello, another notorious developer in town, responsible for at least 50% of Title 21, and while we're all here, rezoned the property to B3 with special limitations, and yes, in fact, we proposed a number of special limitations on the property. If you go out there and look, there are no pole-mounted signs from Hoyt Street over to Braga, and that was a part of this special limitation. Any development, the community was concerned about what was going on, and the Weyerhaeuser Mortgage Company found it acceptable to say any development that occurred would have to come back for a site plan review. And there is a ceiling over the site for building height, and that was to preclude any obstruction of the view of the horizon of downtown and to Mount Susitna from the top of the hill by the Russian Jack Springs Park and entry to the greenhouse area. And that was resolved with Heather Flynn, who was on the assembly at the time, on a site visit. So there's an established benchmark on the adjacent church building at the corner of Braga and Dubar that establishes the base elevation and then establishes the ceiling over the entire site. So this property has quite a bit of history, but I'll start out that Costco developed the project, and in their original development, they developed it with parking spaces at a ratio of 5 per 1,000. So 1 parking space for every 200 square feet, which matched what their kind of national model was that they've found based on their utilization of parking and the types of crowds that they attracted. In the interim, when Sam's Club opened up, that was also a membership club, and there was a reduction in the amount of shopping. It kind of split the shoppers. At that time, Costco was also on a national trend to add gas to their facilities. When they modified their site plan and added gas, they took out 79 parking spaces, which I find ironic that now we're going back to add 80. So we'll be back to the same number that they originally projected back in 1990 as part of their site plan. So yes, we are here tonight primarily because there's a special limitation on the property that requires us to bring any development here. This parking lot of 80 parking spaces on a separate, distinct, legally described and platted, subdivided property. So when we had and it's not owned by Costco at this time, it's under contract and waiting to see if this approval is granted so that they can close on the property from Public Storage, who has decided not to build any more storage at their facility there in December sometime. So we are on a timeline so we can get this closed and on towards specific design. We met with the city staff at a required pre-application meeting and discussed the issue of, okay, we have this odd, number one, I'll reiterate that the big box ordinance needs to be reevaluated and reviewed because it's broken. And Mr. Strike, it's not broken just from you worrying about developers having loopholes. It's broken in the other direction as well. It needs a lot of work because it's got problems. But in taking that into account, in our pre-application meeting, that parking lot, as the staff indicated, 80 parking spaces, parking, permitted principal use in the B3, even the South Cell zoning district. So you don't need any other special review except the special limitation that says you got to come back here and review it. The fact that Costco has it under contract and was going to be adding it for parking utilized for their facility, at the staff level at our pre-application meeting, we said, well, it's still a standalone parking lot. It is a permitted principal use. Yes, it would have to go for the site plan review, but it wouldn't necessarily if it was done by anybody else, like if Tim Potter bought the property, went out there, came to you, got approval for this, built it, and then leased it to Costco. It would not be a big box review or subject to the 10 or 20% and all the other things that go along with the big box. So this is a little bit of a different one, and I haven't faced one exactly like this one before. But because it's a separate, distinct lot, then we talked about the issue of, well, then does the maximum parking really come into play? Because it's a separate, distinct lot that could be sold off, and then they wouldn't be in excess. They'd still have their grandfather rights to the other parking spaces. So I was a little bit surprised when this condition came out, and that's why we asked for it to be modified a bit so that we could sit down and review the issues. I believe that from a demand study, because of the very significant percentage of membership increase at Costco since Sam's Club went out of business and has left the market, there is a significant say 25%, and Peter can correct me if I'm wrong, increase in membership with Costco. So the demand is there and will drive the need for the parking. We've developed a parking lot that's fairly simple. We will have a common development agreement that will accommodate the issue of the ADA parking spaces. There are 16 required. We have 24 approximate to the building, which is the right location for them to be. So we hope that one addresses that issue. We have perfected a walkway that is already there, taken out a landscaping island on one side, and let me move this over. Following the yellow highlighter line, you can see that it does in fact go all the way from Dubar Road between the parking lots to a crossing to an island that the landscaping's been taken out of, replaced with a sidewalk area, then striped linkage directly to the walkway that goes both to the employees' pre-opening door and then all the way around the building on the south side and the west side of the building. So there were a lot of issues that were brought up about, did they look at this? Is this included? Is that included? And I'll be happy to go back through those. But I did want to reiterate that we have reviewed the staff's recommended conditions of approval. We're fully accepting those as modified in their proposed memo of number 5 and 6, and believe that are consistent with previous actions, previous special limitations and zonings on the property, 2040 plan, the East Anchorage District plan, and all others. As far as the landscaping goes, for L1 landscaping adjacent to Dubar Road, there is sizable existing vegetation there that is native vegetation. We will be doing an inventory of that to determine the size, looking at alternative landscaping accommodated and allowed in the code to preserve, as emphasized in the 2040 plan and other places in code, to try and preserve existing native vegetation. We don't want to go in and plant a bunch of other plants that disrupt all the roots and kill the existing vegetation. So we'll be doing a plan based on an inventory of the materials that are there and what their diameter breast height is according to the code, and come forward with a revised plan. As far as snow storage go, we will either be proposing a snow management plan, or we will identify on the revised and final plan that gets submitted to the planning department the approximately 1,367 square feet, whatever it is, of area for snow storage.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. There is no time remaining, but if there are questions for Mr. Potter now, let me know. Otherwise, we can go to public hearing, although I have a feeling that'll go pretty quickly. Is any questions for the petitioner before we go to public hearing? Mr. Looney?
Yes, quickly. I note that there's, on page 71 of the packet, there's a comment from the MOA Traffic Department. They had no, they recommended approval of the site. Do you know whether the discussion as far as the exceeding the number of parking spaces, was that part of your discussion with the department?
We had a meeting with the traffic engineer and two of her associates before she left for her trip to Africa to address a variety of projects. This was one of them, and the issue of the maximum number of parking spaces did come up, and they believed that that was not a big issue, and they were actually surprised that that was even a requirement. And there was something said in that vein that you're not allowed to have over the maximum number of parking spaces unless you get this waiver. In fact, there's another route that is embedded in the code, and that is that you have to put in additional interior parking lot landscaping at a pretty hellacious percentage, but it doesn't rule out the fact that you can have more than what would be the maximum requirement, but you have to compensate in a very significant way with landscaping. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Spring.
Yeah, just a quick question. Well, I noticed that on the aerial maps that there's some Connex trailers on the site. Can you explain what the need for that is and why they do that?
I'm glad you brought that one up. When the package was originally put together, they used an old Google photo and a Google map, and there were about 6 or 7 trailers there. And in fact, staff is correct. They can be used on a temporary basis. The flap that occurred with Home Depot and Lowe's some years ago, as you probably remember, was that they were actually storing and staging goods for sale, like carpet and washers and dryers and refrigerators, in Connex trailers and Connexes out on site in the parking lot. The trailers that you see here are as we get our shipments in on 2 to 3 days a week from the port. Then they queue up and they are then emptied into the store on a delivery basis and then staged until there's a truck that hauls them back to the port. So you may see a few there, but it's on a temporary and rotating basis.
And through the chair, that's because they have to wait for the next ship to come in to take them out, basically.
Pretty much how it works.
Okay.
Because when they typically drop a trailer for delivery, they actually back it up and then disconnect it from the tractor rig and then leave. So they will be taking trailers out as they leave. So you've always got a base of 5 to 7 there on site at some stage of being located on the property, waiting for the next couple of days to come by and you get another shipment and trucks are moving.
And could you respond to the number of bicycle racks at the site?
That was a good one. If the building permit plan that have been submitted, if the comments had come through from staff for that, we have to put in a bike rack that will accommodate 4 bicycles.
Because of the 80 spaces?
Because of the 80 spaces,
yeah.
Yes. And
are there bike racks at Costco right now?
I don't know the number of what's there now.
Don't say that. You say the refrigerator, but you go, they're workers, and you go there, and you should see the lunch and the East High crowd that ends up there. It's pretty substantial. Believe me, I spend more time at this store than I care to really admit.
And Peter appreciates that.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I hope so, because it's a shocker every month. So there are racks. They're underneath the cover somewhere. Is that where they are? Or what?
Yes, and we actually get more. Just because of the way that the store is set up and the bulk that most people buy, it's not a huge draw for customers to be riding bikes to pick up, 100 pack of paper towels or whatever. But it is an employee-related issue.
Yeah, and it's a code requirement.
And we talked about that earlier, and Peter asked us to go out and identify the location that would be best for additional parking or bicycle racks appropriate to both employees and customers that are not in the way to create any congestion for people pushing carts or flat carts out to their cars.
Great.
So we will be doing that.
Great. I'd suggest talking to your employees, too. They might have some feedback on that. But Ryan, you're in the queue, then Mr. Gardner, then Mr. Spring. And then hopefully we'll wrap.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify the bicycle parking requirement for the entire site. So there's 470 parking spaces that are required. 3% of that would be 14.1. So we're looking at 14 bicycle parking spaces for the entire site if we were examining the entire site.
Right.
So for just this amendment to include this new additional parking lot, Mr. Potter is correct. It would just be 4 bicycle parking spaces.
Great. Mr. Gardner.
Yeah, just to confirm my understanding of my orientation and something you said earlier. I'm looking in the comments here. There's one from the Airport Heights, I believe, and they mention pedestrian crosswalk from northwest corner of the proposed parking lot addition ends at a median filled with rocks and plantings. And is that what you were pointing out?
Yes, on the initial plan, or the plan that got submitted to the city initially, for whatever reason, the portion of the plan that actually showed that landscaped bulb area at the end of one of the rows of parking, transitioning from landscaping to a sidewalk area, and the paint stripes was dropped off of the drawing, and that is the drawing that they saw. And it was a good comment, and we've made the change here to make sure that it's very clear.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Spring?
Yeah, just to follow with the bicycle, then staff question. So you're saying that bicycle parking issue will be taken care of in the permitting process? And do we need to have a condition of approval or anything? Or you'll assure us that would be taken care of?
Through the chair, I mean, if we were to open up, Pandora's box to all sorts of critiques of the main retail site, then I would say we could add it as a condition of approval to examine the bicycle parking spaces, but we're currently not doing so. We're just focusing on the main parking lot and its connectivity to the main retail site. So bicycle parking is not really a concern of the municipality at this time.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. So my question was, we should, if we want that looked at, and additional bicycle parking needed to meet the existing requirements, then we should put that as a condition of approval?
Just to clarify, I think what Mr. Spring is saying is if there's a requirement for bicycle spaces as it relates to the 80 new spaces that are being proposed, then where does it stated in the conditions of approval that those are required to be provided? Is that what, I mean, I don't hear anyone asking about opening up the entire site.
Okay.
Right?
No.
It's just the basics there.
And Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Spring, I apologize. That was a misunderstanding. I thought you were talking about the total parking spaces and total
I probably said
bicycle
that.
parking.
But I was trying to figure out if we need to make a condition of approval to accommodate the new demand for bicycle parking.
Yes, if that was a concern that the commission had and they would like to add that as a condition of approval, then yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Potter.
I just wanted to add, it's interesting that the building permit review process has already raised this as an issue and told us that we have to provide the 4 bicycle parking spaces in order to get our building permit to build the lot. If the commission feels the need to add something in here on a redundant basis to make sure that that's taken care of, I'm okay with that. But I do want you to know that there is a process, and yes, sometimes things slip by, but the building department has already picked up on the bicycle parking requirement, so it's fine. But
yeah, you got to give us something to do here, and we already committed to the 4 spaces, so, it just seems like we're just dotting our I's tonight here. Okay.
That's fine. Not away.
Mr. Strike.
Make it real easy. Mr. Potter, the bicycle situation's going to be taken care of, correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, at this point, thank you, Mr. Potter. I see no further questions. I think this is a formality, but at this point, I'd like to open the public hearing. Anybody else wishing to testify, come on down. You 3 gentlemen are here to support, is that correct? Yeah. Anybody wishing to testify? Okay. And I see no further questions for Mr. Potter, and he has no further time, so the public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Strike.
Move this along. In the matter of case 2018-0107, the Costco Wholesale Corporation's major site plan review and amendment to the site plan of a large retail sales establishment to add additional parking, I move for approval.
Is there a second? Are there conditions that you'd like to state along with that main motion?
Yes. And with the acceptance of the department's approvals as amended to include numbers 5 and 6.
So 1 through 7, but the amended 5 and 6?
Correct.
That's your main motion. Seconded. That okay, Mr. Looney? That's what your second is for?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Would you like to speak to that motion? And I would, and Ms. Bailey's also in the queue, but what I'd also suggest is just a reminder that there are 4 general criteria associated with our approval here this evening. But Mr. Strike, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. The petitioner has accepted all 7 of the modified all 7 as modified, 5 and 6 conditions as proposed by the city, is consistent with the previous limitations that have been placed on the property in the past. There have been no public comments received as a result of this action. The one that came out of Airport Heights was handled through the response number 7, I believe, to add these linkage for the pedestrian walkways. So I want to thank the petitioner for incorporating that right away. As far as the 4 conditions have been met. And I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey.
I would just like to add that it tentatively meets the approval criteria of 21.03.180F. However, it does not yet meet the off-street parking criteria, but per condition as amended number 6, it will.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Any further comments or findings? Mr. Spinelli.
I just want to add that Tim Potter gave us his word that there would be 4 bicycle slots.
There you go. So it's not a condition, but your word is there. That is even more significant. Okay. Please vote. This item is approved. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. This meeting is adjourned.